Our scripture for this morning comes from Acts chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Sometime later, as the number of disciples kept growing, there was a quarrel between the Greek-speaking Jews and the native Jews. The Greek-speaking Jews claimed that their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution of funds. So the 12 apostles called the whole group of believers and said, "It is not right for us to neglect the preaching of God's word in order to handle finances. So then, friends, choose 7 men among you who are known to be full of the Holy Spirit and wisdom, and we will put them in charge of this matter. We ourselves then will give our full time to prayer and the work of preaching." This scripture speaks to us in a variety of levels. First of all, the perception or reality of inequity. 2 groups of Jews, the native Jews and the Greek-speaking Jews, appear to be experiencing different treatment. There are inequities between different groups in our society today. Some would label it as racism, sexism, classism, ageism, etc., etc. Half the battle is to recognize where this is indeed a fact. And the rest of the battle involves determining if laws have to be passed or enforced, if new policies and programs need to be introduced, or old ones revisited. Before things escalated, the apostles decided to address the issue. We have to pray to continue to have the wisdom to do the same in every area. The second point I wish to raise is the priority of purpose that the 12 apostles declared. They understood their primary responsibility and call to be the preaching of God's word and to pray. Rather than be distracted from this, they delegated the task of distribution to others. It is good for each of us to determine our call from God, our vision, mission, focus, purpose, passion, whatever way we describe it, so that we know our main preoccupation. The division of government into ministries, agencies, departments, and the like is a wise approach to this vast work of national development. The clearer the guidelines and job descriptions, the better each person can function on a daily basis. Thirdly, the consideration of the choice of leaders, and this is as valid then as now. They were instructed to choose 7 men who were known to be full of the Holy Spirit and wisdom to be put in charge of this matter. I encourage each of you in this house and all of the rest of us to examine ourselves to see the degree to which we are full of the Holy Spirit and wisdom. No task is too menial or too important to be approached without a solid relationship with God in order to be guided. Let our prayer be that we all deepen our position of faith and seek to be wise through revelation and education in order to serve this nation, our families, and our God with integrity, spiritual maturity, and attention to priorities. Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done.
Turnquist, Brent Simonet, Desmond Bannister, Brentwood Wells, Jeffrey Lloyd, Dr. Dwayne Sands, Marvin Dane, Frankie Campbell, Benicio de Aguilar, Michael Pintard, Darren Henfield, Ramal Pereira, Lanisha Rule, Renville Rule, Ellsworth Johnson, Philip Davis, Vaughn Miller, Patricia Parker Edgecombe, Iram Lewis, Carlton Bolag, James Albury, Travis Robinson, Adrian Gibson, Donald Saunders, Frederick McAlpine, Hank Johnson, Mark Hume, Michael Folks, Miriam Wesley Emmanuel, Reese Chiplin, Ruben Ramming, Ricky Mackey, Shannon Dawn Cartwright, Chanel Ferguson, Glennis Hannah Martin, Picewell Forbes, Chester Cooper.
Good morning, honorable members, and good morning to you in the gallery. We have with us this morning a very special group that are celebrating with us this month. The deaf and hard of hearing are celebrating under the theme, "We are equal, embrace, accept, and overcome." In the Bahamas, the deaf and hard of hearing are among the challenge in securing employment in the middle and upper level management positions. Many individuals struggle with acquiring the necessary skills they need to obtain and maintain employment. Deafness is considered a hidden disability, and this population is less often identified as needing specialized service or special consideration in educational, healthcare, and legal settings. I would like to identify the group that are with us this morning. Mrs. Sonia Roll, Principal. Ms. Francine McKenzie, Interpreter. Patrick Pierre, Student. Giovanni Allen, Student. Wilfrenique Belazaire, Student. Radesha Lewis, Student. Michael Wong, Student. Divine Isaac, Student. Tanaj Butler, Student. Donaldo Henfield, former student. And Mr. Peter Macaroni Gilcould, patron. At this time, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Southern Shores.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm always pleased when I view the international calendar and note that recognition is given to special groups, all in an effort to bring awareness and to advocate for the rights that should be afforded to these individuals. However, it gives me extreme pleasure and pride to note that in the Bahamas, we go beyond a mere day or week of recognition to a month of activities, even if observed at a different time, which is very good. September 23rd to 29th, 2019 was observed as the International Week of the Deaf. Moreover, for the first time, the United Nations General Assembly celebrated International Day of Sign Languages on the 23rd of September 2019. The Assembly indicated that moving forward, this day would be recognized annually. The Bahamas Association for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing is the local organization which advocates for the rights of the hearing impaired. The foundation was laid in 1990 under the leadership of Mr. Marvin Finlayson, now deceased. However, it was officially established on the 23rd of March 2012 under the presidency of LaSasha Williams Harry. She continued Mr. Finlayson's work of self-development and independence for this community and implemented his dream of national deaf education reform. She and the newly established organization's goal was a better future for the deaf. Under her leadership, several initiatives were carried out, the most important of which was her representation on the committee which drafted the Persons with Disabilities Equal Opportunities Act, as well as her appointment to the National Committee on Persons with Disabilities. Her placement on the commission gave her the opportunity to strongly advocate for communication access for the deaf. Consequently, the organization was instrumental in introducing the first communications access real-time transformation equipment in the Bahamas, in the addition to the deaf education reform. The current president, Mr. Shelmadine Cartwright, who, by the way, just recently returned from Arizona to attending an international conference along with Jonathan Cooper, which our ministry was pleased to support, was recently appointed, and he, Mr. Cartwright, is continuing with the work started by his predecessors. In fact, the calendar of events is very impressive, and in conjunction with the Disabilities Affairs Division, these events include on the 5th, well, that one is gone, 12th, 19th, and 26th, sign language classes at Starbucks in Harbor Bay between 6 and 8 p.m. On the 15th, there is a game night at the Grace Community Center between 6:30 and 9 p.m. On the 16th, there's a fun run walk from the Center for the Deaf at 6 a.m. On the 17th, Mr. Speaker, Grace Community Church Deaf Awareness Church Service at 11 a.m. On the 22nd, Abundant Life sponsored a night of fun. On the 24th, a combined church service at St. Michael's Methodist Church at 9:30 a.m. And then on the 28th, there will be a Thanksgiving lunch at the center. On the 29th, at the Marathon Mall at 11 a.m., there will be a silent lunch. And then finally, to round off the month, there's the Family Fun Day, sponsored by the center, from midday to 5 p.m. on the 30th. I invite all persons within my hearing to support these events based on their availability. Despite activities being held in November, I'm especially impressed that the Bahamas Association for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing is already on board with the United Nations International Day of Sign Languages, which is necessary, Mr. Speaker, for the deaf to participate fully in their communities and to ensure the full realization of their human rights. We as the government, through the Center for the Deaf, are doing our part to ensure that all children who are hearing impaired are taught sign language. I wish, Mr. Speaker, to invite parents and guardians of all children who are hearing impaired, but are not yet taking advantage of what is being offered, to please do so. Mr. Speaker, with the permission of the Minister of Education, the Honorable Member for South Beach, I wish to mention that plans and discussions are on the way for a multi-purpose center that would offer sign language to adults. The legal recognition of national sign languages as official languages is critical for the inclusion of deaf people in their societies. This legal recognition, Mr. Speaker, will aid with the implementation and realization of the rights outlined in the United Nations Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the 2030 Agenda, making the mottos "Nothing about us without us," to leave no one behind, a reality. Mr. Speaker, you called off the names of persons in attendance. I'm advised that one of our lovely students is a 4.0 student. My participation and interaction with the rest of them makes me satisfied that their teaching is top-notch. So I want to acknowledge Principal Rule and her staff. I also want to acknowledge someone who wasn't called, Ms. Annette Lunn, who is part of the staff at the Urban Renewal Commission, but she is also busy at this church, that center, the next center, and everywhere she's needed, interpreting for deaf persons. Finally, I want to acknowledge Mr. Kelvin Lunn, who himself is a deaf young man, but Kelvin is a teacher. Kelvin is a teacher at the Center for the Deaf 2 days of the week, where he teaches physical education, and then he is a teacher at the Galvantines School, where he is a PE teacher for the autism class the other 3 days of the week. Mr. Speaker, the patron is well known, he needs no introduction. I want to thank him for his continued support and for all persons who are conscientious about the presence and the existence of persons in our community who are deaf and hearing impaired and who go and ensure that they have equal access. Mr. Speaker, as I take my seat, I beg leave to speak directly to the students, if I may. I'm going to try a little something, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister of Social Services and Urban Development, I pledge the ministry's support. I pledge the government's support to leave no one behind. I pledge my support for a better life for the deaf. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Love y'all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. Honorable Member, are you tabling? Yes. Order that the document be brought up.
Thank you.
Order that the document do lie on the table. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. The International Tax Cooperation Amendment to Schedule, the Kingdom of Norway, Order 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Further laying of documents by ministers.
I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. The International Tax Cooperation Amendment to Schedule, Multilateral Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters, Order 2019.
Order that the document be brought up, and order that the first document do lie on the table. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. The Currency Notes and Coins Amendment Number 2, Order 219.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Carmichael.
It please you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. One, the Bahamas Power and Light Fire Report 2018. And secondly, the report of the finding of the Bahamas Electric Corporation Clifton Pier Diesel engine fire cause and damage assessment and cost evaluation. Speaker, let me say that it is regrettable that these documents got into the public domain before they came here, and I regret that very much. There must be confidence between public institutions, and that is all that I will say on that. If you will permit me a little liberty this morning, sir, I also want to apologize to the Bahamian people for the outage last night. The outage in the western area of New Providence last night was caused when BPL was tying into the system. They began tying in the new generators at Clifton into the system, into the grid. And because of what happened, there was an inadvertent tie-in, which caused the protection systems to automatically shut down. So they automatically triggered the protection systems at BPL, and they shut down the Skyline and the Windsor Field Road areas. And as a result, power was off from about 6:38 p.m. until about 8:50 p.m. I think it's important for me to let everybody know exactly what happened. So, Mr. Speaker, if I may table these two documents, please.
Yes, order that the documents be brought up. Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, if it pleases you, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. The Public Holidays National Heroes Day 2019, opening of shop notice 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Again, Mr. Speaker, if it pleases you, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. The Consumer Protection 2018-2019 Annual Report and audited financial statements of the year ending 31st of March 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Chair.
No further laying, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Statements and communications by ministers. Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentations of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Carmichael.
Please do, Mr. Speaker. I rise as I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a copy of the following. A bill for an act to repeal and replace the Electricity Rate Reduction Bond Act. 2015, we find a legal framework for the issuance and redemption of securitized rate reduction bonds. Mr. Speaker, if I may just say one or two words very quickly. The former administration realized very, very properly the need for rate reduction bond legislation in 2015. And they passed legislation with the leader of the opposition indicating there was a need to raise some $600 million. We seek to repeal and replace that legislation simply because modern bond transactions now require a higher degree of sophistication in the legislation. So we seek to do this to we understand that this is a type of move that both sides at one stage, and I don't speak for members of it now, but both sides at one stage would have appreciated the need for this in our electricity sector. I want to make an offer to the opposition, Mr. Speaker, that anytime this week, should they wish, we would be happy to have them, provide them with the opportunity to sit down with legal counsel, the Attorney General's office, and legal external counsel to look at the rationale behind the legislation, if there are any challenges, any concerns. That offer is open, and I think it's very important that we are very, very open with respect to what we're seeking to do. And so if the opposition indicates that at any stage, we would like to be able to make that opportunity available. And Mr. Speaker, finally, I want to indicate that at page 34, there's a minor typo, which we may have to foreshadow. I may have to foreshadow a minor formal amendment, or it may get by under a slip rule because there is a typo there, 73A. I want to just foreshadow that now. It is not anything of any great consequence, but it's something that we would wish to foreshadow for colleagues. And Mr. Speaker, before I sit, if you would permit me, I do want to offer my prayerful condolences to Mrs. David Forbes as I sit. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, honorable member. Just before we proceed, is there a seconder? Order that the bill be brought up. Order that the bill do lie on the table. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to repeal and replace the Electricity Rate Reduction Bond Act 2015 to refine the legal framework for the issuance and redemption of securitized rate reduction bonds. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Centerville.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just wanted to ask the minister, as an independent in the House of Assembly, I would just like to know if the opportunity afforded to the opposition to be a part of the legal framework review could also be extended to Senator.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Carmichael.
Mr. Speaker, my brother over there knows that any opportunity that I can provide for him, I will. I was supposed to joke with him the other day that when I debated here, and all of the official opposition left, had he been here, he would have been the official opposition.
Honorable members, just before we okay. Yes. Honorable members, the chair now orders that the bill be read for a first time.
Repeal and replace the Electricity Rate Reduction Bond Act 2015 to refine the legal framework for the issuance and redemption of securitized rate reduction bonds.
Thank you. Thank you very much. At this time, the chair wishes to join with the member of Carmichael in bringing condolences to our clerk of this parliament on the passing of his mother. We know that this is a difficult time for him and for members of his family. And we pray that God gives him a spirit of peace during this time of bereavement. And we pray that his mother rests in peace and rise in glory. Further first reading of bills. Second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Killarney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, before I get into my debate, I too would like to extend condolence to Clark and his family on the passing of his mother. But I'd also like, Mr. Speaker, to welcome the special group to deaf and hard of hearing and be assured that the government would provide all the necessary facilities, equipment, and supplies to maximize their potential benefit, just as we do for every Bahamian citizen in this country. And we want them to remember that one of the greatest composers the world has ever known, Beethoven, was deaf. And his greatest composition came after he was deaf. And therefore, in spite of one pseudo disability, the sky is still the limit. Mr. Speaker, I am certain today that the opposition would not oppose this bill, authority bill that we're speaking today. After all, it was the opposition who said, when we spoke about the bill, that their former leader, former prime minister, had envisaged bringing such a bill forward with future hurricanes. So I am certain that you would not oppose the thinking of your former leader. Mr. Speaker, just 2 months ago, Hurricane Dorian devastated Abaco, the Abaco Keys, and Grand Bahama. And it was the strongest storm hurricane ever to hit our country. And in fact, the Secretary General of the United Nations described the hurricane as category hell. Tragically, Mr. Speaker, there were many fatalities and still many are missing. The grief felt by the loved ones of those who lost family and friends is immense, and we continue to pray for them in this most difficult time. And in the midst of the global climate emergency, Dorian set an example to the world of the ferocity of superstorms. It brought winds and destruction to this archipelago, the likes of which we had never, ever seen. Maximum sustained winds was recorded at 185 miles per hour and gusts as high as 220 miles per hour. And 20-plus foot storm surge redefined for this generation of Bahamians and the world what a hurricane could do. Mr. Speaker, I do want to point out that while visiting Manawar Key, I want to remind individuals that one of the residents, a young man who had a wind velocity gauge, at the commencement of the storm, he was able to record wind velocity at 250 miles per hour. And just to show the devastation and the disaster that this storm had brought, Mr. Speaker, I want to remind members that about 7 to 10 days after the storm, a boat in Manawar Key called the Grasshopper, which was docked in Manawar Key here in the Bahamas, was found 7 to 10 days later off the Georgia coast. The scope and scale of Dorian's destruction, Mr. Speaker, was too much for any small island developing state to respond on its own. And we asked, and we welcomed in the international community to assist us. Foreign governments, charities, NGOs, and corporate entities came to the country to partner with the government of the Bahamas and local charities and NGOs to provide both aid and assistance. And this combined effort saved many lives and eased the suffering of those who lost everything. Our government, Mr. Speaker, leads this collaborative effort, and it continues to do so up to this day. And we are certain that many of the NGOs would remain, and we would continue to lead this effort as we rebuild both Abaco, Grand Bahama, and the Abaco Keys. We coordinate with these international partners to ensure that the people of the islands and keys impacted by Dorian get the forms of assistance necessary and the forms of assistance that are needed. And given the scale of the disaster, we had to decide how resources would be deployed. And such international collaboration is common with natural disasters when it comes to big and small countries. When the powerful Hurricane Maria devastated the small island nation of Dominica in 2017, the world came to help. The international community similarly came to the assistance of the United States of America in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina ravaged Louisiana. And catastrophes such as Dorian, Maria, and Katrina require broad-based public, private, and international partnership in response, Mr. Speaker. I've also been pleased that so many Bahamians from across the country and around the world stepped in and stepped in with kindness, generosity, and resourcefulness to help their brothers and sisters in the North in their time of need. And, Mr. Speaker, as we progress, we must keep the spirit of generosity alive. The work on restoration is immense and will continue for some time. Mr. Speaker, in seeing the destruction caused by Dorian, my government knew right away we had to change how the Bahamas prepares for and responds to storms, especially mega storms, many more of which we may see as this climate change continues. The warmer seas, due to climate change, mean that cyclones that peaked at Category 1 or 2 in a previous time now may be of Category 4 or 5 intensity, and possibly even more. Or Category Hell, as the UN Secretary General stated after seeing the scale of the disaster for himself. We have to change, Mr. Speaker. We have to revise and, in various instances, dramatically overhaul laws, procedures, agencies, and mindset for these times. And there are those who cling to doing things the old way. Whenever innovation is suggested, they say, no, 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 not this time, no. They complain and they fear change. But, Mr. Speaker, change is inevitable. The world is changing, and we must adapt to this changing world. But change is a must if we are to develop new procedures, structures, and modes of thinking that may save lives and lessen the damage to hard-earned property when storms strike. I spent my career, Mr. Speaker, caring for mothers and children at the most delicate period, the beginning of life. My vocation and my work was to ensure the newborns successfully came into the world and that the mothers safely made the delivery. And at the end of the day, to ensure both the mother and the infant, the future of our country, survived the ordeal of delivery. It has been a great privilege, Mr. Speaker, to help bring into the world thousands of beautiful babies. And yes, it's by far more than 5,000, but I refuse to give the exact numbers because there are many who would immediately begin calculating as to how much the delivery cost and how much he may have made. So I rounded off at 5,000 so as to prevent confusion both here and abroad. In my capacity, Mr. Speaker, as Prime Minister, it is my responsibility to protect human life and to ensure the safety and security of Bahamians from multiple threats. It is the responsibility of my government to give birth to a new regime of disaster preparedness and response in the Bahamas that better preserves life and lessens the impact of disasters. As a people, Mr. Speaker, It would be unwise and indeed foolish if we let or allow the status quo to remain after experiencing Dorian's wrath. So, Mr. Speaker, after various hurricanes, successive governments set up ad hoc or temporary measures. Such ad hoc measures are insufficient in light of the challenges posed by hurricanes in the face of the global climate emergency. The Disaster Reconstruction Authority Bill 2019 we debate today is a major part of the necessary change in how the government and the Bahamas respond to disaster preparedness, response, and reconstruction. And this legislation establishes a body corporate to be known as the Bahamas Disaster Reconstruction Authority. The authority, Mr. Speaker, will be responsible for the management of reconstruction and restoration in areas designated disaster zones. The Prime Minister may appoint a Minister of State who shall be responsible for the oversight of the authority and any disaster zone, reconstruction committees appointed by the authority. Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, will have the authority after a disaster in consultation with the relevant authorities to declare an impacted area a disaster zone. And the functions of the authority are to assess the reconstruction needs of a disaster zone and prepare a reconstruction plan. I want to repeat that, Mr. Speaker, because I've listened to Dumas and Ragged Island talking about plans repeatedly. And yes, he has his head down, but I know his hair is wide open. The functions of the authority, I repeat, to assess the reconstruction needs of a disaster zone and prepare a reconstruction plan. Other functions, Mr. Speaker, to oversee the reconstruction plan and its implementation in a disaster zone. They are to monitor, regulate, and administer all matters related to the management of reconstruction work in a disaster zone. They are to arrange the distribution of funds or materials for reconstruction. They are to oversee the restoration of government services in a disaster zone. They are also, Mr. Speaker, to construct, equip, maintain or repair any public property in a disaster zone for use by the general public. And they are also to establish and coordinate relationships with national and international bodies engaged in similar or ancillary pursuits. And they are to consult with the Minister on matters of national reconstruction policy and capital development programs in a disaster zone. Mr. Speaker, there will be a board of directors of the authority, and the board will be the governing body of the authority and shall perform the functions and exercise the powers of the authority. And the board will consist of a chairman and deputy chairman appointed by the minister on the advice of the Prime Minister. There will also be a managing director of the authority, the director of NEMA or a representative of the ministry appointed by the minister, and not more than 7 nor less than 3 other people appointed by the chairman after consultation with the minister. Mr. Speaker, the chairman shall not hold political office. member of parliament, no senator, no chairman of any political party, none who holds political office can chair such a board. The authority, Mr. Speaker, will have the powers to accept, deposit, and act as trustee and manager of any gifts, donations, endowments, or bequests for the purposes of reconstruction of a disaster zone. It will also have the authority powers to enter into contracts necessary to carry out any functions under this act. Mr. Speaker, I think that is extremely important, that this gives the authority the liberty to hire a structural engineer, town planner, energy consultant, or whatever is necessary that will help rebuild resiliency and a resilient nation, town, as we move forward. Structural engineer, Mr. Speaker, is especially important at this time, as where there may be shortages at the ministry, the authority would have such powers or authority to contract engineers from the private sector to complete such work. And I was most impressed how it was being done in Manawaki, where structural engineer would come out, assess, and make determination and decisions with respect to various homes that were damaged. And those homes, some have been declared beyond repair, and some have been declared that they can be repaired. And those that were determined to be beyond repair, arrangements would have been made for the owner as well as the insurance company to be present, so that that declaration could have been agreed upon, after which that home would immediately be demolished and subsequently carted away, so that new construction can commence and a new city with resiliency can commence. Mr. Speaker, I think that is the way forward. Decisions can be made quickly, rapidly, and demolition can be made quickly, rapidly, and construction can likewise be made quickly and as soon as possible in an efficient manner, so as to remove the bureaucracy sometime imposed by government. The Speaker also have the authority to invest any funds representing such legacy, endowment, bequest, or gifts, if not immediately required. They'll have the authority to appoint employees and to second individuals from various ministries to work of the authority and to make necessary legal action to implement reconstruction operations as it deems appropriate in any disaster area. The authority, Mr. Speaker, will also have the power to conduct operational activities in disaster zones and to direct any person who is in a position to do so to stop any work, close any premises or place deemed necessary. And further, Mr. Speaker, the authority will be empowered to establish the Bahamas National Recovery and Reconstruction Trust Fund and to provide for the appointment of its trustees. And this trust fund, Mr. Speaker, will be an independent and non-political body to help fund home and building repairs. Mr. Speaker, I just want to say a few words about trust fund. The trust fund being established to be non-political, totally independent, with a board of trustees, the trustee totally independent, and the trustee would be individuals like President of Royal Bank, CEO, just give examples, CEO of Pepsi Cola, some president of some other international organization was totally transparent, and the trust would be accordingly. Below the trust would be a committee, and that committee would comprise, again, of non-professionals. It's important to point out, Mr. Speaker, that there will be no politicians assigned to this trust, no politicians assigned to the committee, no politicians involved in any of these money matters. But Mr. Speaker, as inspectors go out and assess the damage of individual homes, determination may be made that there are $5,000 or $6,000 worth of damage. That report is then given to the committee, who has similar professionals on board, and they would make a determination that that is correct and subsequently given to the trust. The trust would then have the responsibility of either paying the contractor who is assigned to the work and the contractor, the list of contractors from the Ministry of Works, so as to ensure that we are getting quality work. They would then assign a portion of the money that is necessary for the contractor and a portion for the supplies. In some instances, individuals may have their own supplies, in which case the monies may be assigned to the contractor to ensure coverage. Mr. Speaker, it's not unusual that while renovating buildings, one may run into unforeseen circumstances. And therefore, that may pose an additional $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. And those individuals, that information would then again go through the same process where the committee can make determination that an additional $4,000 is necessary. That information is handed to the trust, and the trust can subsequently manage that appropriately. But it's all done transparent, Mr. Speaker. But at the same time, there must be a transparent method of selecting whose homes are repaired. And that also would be done, Mr. Speaker. And just to give an example, one may determine that individuals who has insurance may not fit into this category. One may determine that single mothers or individuals who have a certain combined income at a certain level, less than 50,000 or whatever, fits the mode. One may determine that individuals who are disabled or have disabled individuals, family members in their home, fits the mode. You may determine that individuals who are category of the elderly fits the mode. But Mr. Speaker, what I'm basically pointing out, the category are set out and the priorities are set out, and therefore one cannot make decision that this is a PLP or this is an FNM or this is a DNA. The hurricane affected the humans. And Mr. Speaker, with a transparent board with trustees, such an entity can remain indefinitely so that monies can continuously be deposited, and individuals would not be placed in a position of having home repairs, but hopefully we would be able to construct and rebuild individual homes. And I would encourage, once that is established, I would encourage individuals, banks, corporations, etc., to make donations to such a trustee. I would encourage Bahamians, be it $5, $10, or $15, to make deposits to such a fund, knowing that everything is transparent and the monies are used to help their fellow Bahamians who would have suffered great damage as a result of Dorian, to help repair their home. Mr. Speaker, I pointed that out to say and to point out that such a program has been utilized in the Cayman Islands, who had suffered severe devastation, I think, in 2004. And the trust still exists and the deposit still exists. And the Cayman Islands, as a result of this transparency, has been able to construct well in excess of 389 homes. And we hope to be in such position. And as for individuals who are employed, and we would encourage them to make standing order donation monthly. And if that is done, we would encourage the banks to remove all costs or charges related to standing order, because you would know exactly where your monies are going, and you would know that your monies are being spent fairly in a non-political manner and totally transparent. And therefore, 5, 7 years from the day, homes can still be repaired, built, or whatever is necessary. But Mr. Speaker, that is the thinking of this government, and I am certain that the opposition would encourage and agree with that, knowing that I, as Prime Minister, would not have the power to select a particular individual that I want their home repaired because they support me or whatever. It's all done by trustee, and total transparency. Mr. Speaker, we must create a public culture that is accountable and transparent with hurricane relief funds, and that scorns on corruption and fraud. And Mr. Speaker, a key component of this legislation is that the board of the authority may appoint disaster zone reconstruction committees. And these committees could be appointed before a potential disaster or after it occurs. And such committees will be responsible for reconstruction and rehabilitation in the disaster zone for which they are appointed. The board, Mr. Speaker, will determine when the restoration work is complete. By time? 1 hour. You're cutting me short.
Don't worry about that. You got your time. 1 hour.
Oh, Mr. Speaker. You know, these young people are still in the microwave era. They wanna singe me quick. Don't cut me short. Mr. Speaker, the board will determine when the restoration work is complete. However, a committee will not operate beyond, and Mr. Speaker, we would have to make a correction in the bill. The bill says 3 years, but that should be 5 years. So the bill says 3 years, but it should be 5 years. Please make that correction. When the consequences of a disaster require long-term management, that management would be turned over to the relevant ministry. The authority will allocate funding for these committees. In disaster zones, Mr. Speaker, the authority will serve as the focal point for liaison between the government and international contributors to contribute and provide oversight of international disaster assistance. And Mr. Speaker, the funds and resources of the authority will consist of sums allocated by Parliament, sums arising from grants, covenants, donations, and other receipts from persons including national and international bodies, sums borrowed by the authority, and all other sums of property that may in any manner become payable to or vested in the authority in respect of any matter incidental to its function. And all funds collected or received for the purposes of this act by the government or any ministry, agency, or entity controlled by the government shall be directed and allocated to the authority without delay. The funds of the authority shall be applied to work related to disaster zones and related public education. The remuneration of the members of the board and authority will come from funds allocated by Parliament. Where the authority accepts any donation of funds, materials, equipment, or other goods donated for a specific purpose, that donation must be used for specific purposes. Mr. Speaker, I want to point out that there's one clause in this bill that allows only 20% of the budget to be utilized for salaries, personal emolument. This is a new entity, Mr. Speaker, and a new policy, and it's placed here in this particular bill. I think that is important, Mr. Speaker, because we have government entities, agencies, similar to authorities, who has gone viral, where 99% of the budget is used for salaries.
Oh my God.
Would that mean those agencies cannot move forward? And it's only a matter of time before 110% of the budget is used for salaries. And Mr. Speaker, we're trying to avoid that so that individuals of such authority don't go viral and believe that is an employment agency and employ here, there, left, right, up, down, and wherever they choose. As is customary, Mr. Speaker, with statutory authorities, audited annual financials will be presented to Parliament. And Mr. Speaker, this legislation also addresses the issue of travel authorization for international aid workers during disasters. The Department of Immigration may grant to personnel of international contributors a humanitarian travel authorization, provided there are no national security or public health and safety concerns related to the particular individual. A humanitarian travel authorization shall be free of charge and granted for an initial period of 3 months. It will be renewable, free of charge, for periods up to 6 months, and thereafter as necessary throughout the disaster recovery period. Mr. Speaker, that means that it can be extended way beyond the 6 months as necessary, whatever is required to rebuild our country and improve our resiliency. The holder of a humanitarian travel authorization will be allowed to undertake disaster recovery assistance work in a disaster zone. And we appreciate the support given to us by the generous aid agencies and their staff during this crisis. This new process makes easier their work with us now and in the future. Mr. Speaker, this is a far-reaching legislation that advances our disaster management regime. The authority will collaborate with the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, in carrying out its functions under this Act. The director or NEMA may delegate any or all of its functions within a disaster zone to the authority where he determines it to be appropriate. Mr. Speaker, we are serious, dead serious, about making change. And we will make change. My government is hard at work in the process of reconstructing Abaco, Dabaco, Keys, and Grand Bahama. A part of this reconstruction is new economic projects for Grand Bahama and Abaco. And towards this end, there will soon be a major announcement for Grand Bahama that will provide significant economic prospects and activity, as well as a significant number of jobs.
All right.
Mr. Speaker, Baytown won't be left out. No, Trevor, not Travis. When you go to New Delhi, see what you learn there. Mr. Speaker, I returned from Abaco on the weekend after holding a series of 4 town hall meetings in the Keys, including Green Turtle Key, Warner Key, Manawar Key, and Elbow Key. And I was reminding the member for St. Anne's, who has great roots in the Keys of Abaco, I had to inform him that I have some stripes there, as I've been given the key. So
PM has been given the keys to all the keys.
I have liberty. Once you have the key, I can move in day and or night. Anytime, Mr. Simonet. But Mr. Speaker, we are actively working to get these economic engines working. Now, some people may visit Abaco and then say, looking at Marsh Harbor, and say, oh, we're not doing anything. They must remember that the southern end of Abaco is functional. The northern end is functional, as the light in the Cooperstown area was connected and functional Sunday. So Cooperstown is now enjoying air conditioning the whole way to the north. And the port, the North Abaco port is open, the Marsh Harbor port is open, and the airport, I've been assured that should be open by weekend or soon after.
Yes.
But, Mr. Speaker, we have been working extremely hard, especially in the Keys, because the Keys are the economic engine of Abaco. Elbow Key, for example, hires in excess of 400 individuals. And between the Keys, they hire thousands of individuals. It's essential to get those engines running, because Marsh Harbor itself is a conduit. They provide accommodation, they provide supplies and others, but the manpower is at the Keys, and it's essential if we want to get our economic engine running that we concentrate on the Keys. And therefore, when individuals walk into Marsh Harbor and they see debris on the side, not the side of the road, but in yards, etc., they say, oh, the government is not working. But your government is working smartly. Mr. Speaker, I plan to hold regular town hall meetings throughout communities affected by Dorian in Abaco and Grand Bahama as we continue recovery and reconstruction. That clock right now? Okay. Okay. Mr. Speaker, I only want to divert here for the benefit of the member for South Africa. Oh, for the benefit of the member of South Africa, there was some degree of confusion as to what is allowed duty-free and VAT-free within the Abacos. And I know that the commencement period for VAT-free has been placed at December 1st. December 1st for VAT-free. The Speaker, the explanation given was that it would take a couple of weeks to readjust the computer to deal with the VAT-free component. But we must understand that Abaco has no inventory. There's no computer, there's no commerce, there's nothing to adjust. Only Grand Bahama. And therefore, the order is being made, drafted, so that Abaco would be VAT-free immediately. And this would include both residential and commercial products. And the exigency list would be expanded, and all items are itemized, both residential and commercial products. But Grand Bahama would be delayed until the 1st because Grand Bahama has inventory that has to be dealt with appropriately. But there's no way or no reason why Abaco should be penalized because Grand Bahama has inventory. Thank you. The Speaker, as I've said, I plan to hold regular town hall meetings throughout communities affected by Dorian in Abaco, Grand Bahama, as we continue our recovery and reconstruction efforts. Because I want to directly hear the concerns of the people of these areas. These town halls also allow us to update residents on the progress of reconstruction efforts and to inform them about what is being done to rebuild their communities and to jumpstart their economy. There's too much, Mr. Speaker, fake news being circulated. And member for Exuma and Ragged Island, I've mentioned town hall meetings on the areas that are affected. I want to say that after the Christmas, coming January, we would start with new, energized government. And it's my intention to travel throughout all the family islands. We would only make the shuffle if you walk the floor.
Just not to take a drink, Clay. You know?
We welcome you. Exuma, we welcome you. All I say, come home. You're not happy over there. You are a stepchild over there. Your DNA lies here. But you are always welcome. Always remember you have a place in this parliament. If they don't want you there, we will take you here.
There's room for everything.
All right? We cannot allow South Andres to come alone. Come with me.
There's one party.
Anyhow, Exuma we will take you too, but we won't take your leader. We don't want him. All right? We will take her. If we don't take Angliston, we're going to take the seat. Anyhow, you're going to cause Angliston jump all over me when she comes. So, Mr. Speaker, allow me to return to my text, because I know I am not about to pick any fight today with Angliston. Today is a relaxation day for me. I was having headaches last night. I don't have any now. and I am not going to allow Angliston to start my headaches again.
You ain't gonna let her yuck up your vexation.
No, she's not going to yuck up my vexation. In these town hall meetings, Mr. Speaker, facts and accurate information are discussed. I know an Angliston coming in, oh, Jesus, she can be roaring. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the work of reconstruction is a collaborative effort, and my government leads this effort with local and international partners. This legislation is needed to help cut through the red tape and bureaucracy that slows progress in our Bahamas. We need more efficient and aggressive mechanisms to get things done. The process of improving disaster response and preparedness will continue beyond this legislation before us. My government will continue to have a vigorous dialogue on other reforms that are necessary and needed. We will make changes through legislation and through policy, administrative and personnel changes. The naysayers will not deter us. We have entered I-95 and there will be no exit. It's all throttles ahead. We see the finish line and we will move towards that finish line. I'm ready to go. Mr. Speaker, the consequences of inaction or inadequate action are too great. We must act to save lives and to lessen suffering. We will do what is best for the Bahamian people who entrusted us with the awesome responsibility to govern and to act in the promotion of the common good. Mr. Speaker, before I close, I just want to comment on a particular matter. I see all over social media and both daily magazines this morning talking about what my Minister of Sports had done and a bunch of arguments with a picture of herself personalized and other matters. The Speaker, in view of what has been personalized, it is the government's decision that that was a personal picture medal, and the government should not have paid for anything that's personalized. And therefore, the monies that were spent for that, the minister would reimburse the government for the $582.40 that was spent by the government. I also want to say, Mr. Speaker, with respect to Junkanoo, that both Minister and I would have had ongoing discussion with the Junkanoo leaders. The decision is the Junkanoo will not change at this particular time. We are moving into the Junkanoo season. However, February, the minister and JCNT and all the relevant agencies would have a discussion as to the way forward, so that by the end of March, we would know the way forward with respect to the Junkanoo world, because changes must occur, but this must be discussed and agreed upon by all the relevant parties. So, Mr. Speaker, those matters are resolved as far as we are concerned. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you very much for indulging me to move this bill here this morning. And upon concluding, I only want to say that I so move this authority bill this morning. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Central Grand Bahama.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the representative for the good constituency of Central Grand Bahama, I rise to bring brief remarks on the self-explanatory Disaster Reconstruction Authority Bill 2019. Mr. Speaker, firstly, I would like to extend my profound condolences to the Cooper family, who lost one of their family members in a tragic accident in Grand Bahama a few days ago. So to Paxton and Stephanie Cooper and family, I would say I know exactly how it feels to lose a young, promising son. To the McIntosh family of Waterkey, I'd like to also extend my condolences as they would have laid their patriarch, Mr. Alton McIntosh, to rest on Saturday. Also to members of the Cabinet Office on the loss of one of their staff members. Additionally, to the Williams family and of course to our clerk, I extend my full condolences. Mr. Speaker, in advance of my contribution on the bill, I would be remiss if I failed to express gratitude to the staff from the Ministry of Disaster Preparedness, Management and Reconstruction, NEMA, the Police and Defense Force, various government ministries and departments for their valiant and ongoing efforts to restore normalcy to the islands and keys that were severely affected by Hurricane Dorian. It is equally important that I extend gratitude to persons from the private sector, local civic and non-government organizations or NGOs. I am convinced that this comprehensive support will unquestionably give rise to a bigger, a better Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, more than 2 months has passed since Dorian ravaged the island and keys of the northeastern Bahamas. Poignantly, I note that touring the islands and keys is always a thoughtful and reflective moment when considering families and friends who were casualties of Hurricane Dorian. In fact, when I visited High Rock a few weeks ago, there's a church that lost 14 of its members in Dorian. However, as we toured that constituency on that Sunday, along with the Prime Minister, the DPM, they were outside worshiping their God in the tent. So in spite of the tragedies, they recognize that God is real and they are still grateful for the lives that he would have saved. What I found to be so riveting, Mr. Speaker, is that in the wake of despair, there is a sense of overwhelming peace, joy, and harmony as the beautiful smile returned to the faces of many, and the resiliency is evidenced as we embark on the rebuilding of properties that were decimated. There is a mere reminder, based on history, that the people of this country will always triumph over any natural disaster by the grace of Almighty God. As of our own strength, we cannot do it. Mr. Speaker, I would have alluded on several occasions to the fact that I am an architect by profession. Moreover, my initial training in the field came via the Ministry of Public Works. And if there was one thing among many that I took from this ministry, which I found to be quite interesting as a young professional, was the layers upon layers of authorization that I was subjected to. While I was not critical of this approach, I assumed the position that the approach may not have been best aligned with best practices. Needless to say, Mr. Speaker, I realized that the system was inculcated years prior to my onboarding, and I should assume my rightful position, which was to complete my assignment and allow it to navigate several approval levels before presenting to a customer. Mr. Speaker, we are in 2019, and being mindful of the last 5 years, the frequency and intensity of superstorms like Dorian, as the Prime Minister called it, Category Hell, will continue. Hence, it's incumbent that administrations re-examine processes. During times of natural disaster, bureaucracy should not be the defining factor in determining the expediency at which relief and reconstruction is provided for those in need. Mr. Speaker, the authority bill in its basic form of interpretation is far from what I consider to be innovative. It is simply a necessity. The status quo cannot continue in the aftermath of a natural disaster, and if there is an acute desire to compress response from government during challenging times, processes must be changed. Mr. Speaker, I wish not to prolong my remarks on this bill. However, it is worth noting that the authority, while regarded as a semi-autonomous agency, will not impinge on NEMA's assignment, but will add value through collaboration in the execution of each entity's responsibilities. In fact, as was stated earlier by the Prime Minister, the Director of NEMA is mandated to sit on the authority's board. Furthermore, if there is any concern with respect to the authority fulfilling its fiduciary responsibilities and aspiring to the highest level of transparency, financial measures and constant reporting are stipulated in the bill. I am not concerned with this bill, Mr. Speaker. I am indeed elated, because now an invoice from a vendor, a request from an NGO, or a business transaction will not require authorization from the technical officer onto the director, the permanent secretary, the minister, and in some instances, the accounts department, the treasury department, the tenders board, and again, the cabinet. In summary, I am alluding to bureaucracy, which is addressed through the Act. We are all familiar with the term, Mr. Speaker, time is of the essence. And in this phrase, is more pronounced or relevant in times of grave challenges. I reiterate that while I'm not critical of current processes, I am mindful that we cannot adopt a dinosaur approach during and in the aftermath of a natural disaster. We have to be proactive in removing bottlenecks that restrict progression. I am of the view, Mr. Speaker, that the creation of an authority whose responsibilities encompasses, among other things, assessing, evaluating, and overseeing reconstruction in a disaster zone is regarded as a modality that is more effective and efficient in comparison to the status quo. Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt that the Disaster Reconstruction Authority Bill will provide expedient solution to challenges arising from disaster. Moreover, the Streamline Bill exudes clarity in its objectives and will, from my perspective, create a path for sustainable economic development. And, Mr. Speaker, just a few days ago, I spoke briefly at an event. And this event was the constituency meeting for the Carmichael constituency, where I was invited by the Minister and his chairman to address his audience. And I alluded to the Disaster Reconstruction Authority Bill. My comments on the bill were in reference to transparency and undertaking appropriate measures in challenging circumstances. As a premise to my remarks, I reminded the attendees of a biblical incident where 12 spies were sent out to investigate a land that was promised to the Israelites. And all I think you will like this one. I reminded them of a Bible incident where 12 spies were sent out to investigate a land that was promised to the Israelites.
Led by Joshua. 2
of the 12, Mr. Speaker, gave a comprehensive report, and notwithstanding what appeared to be major challenges, giants, the 2 did everything they possibly could to convince the majority that together they had what it took to overcome the challenges ahead of them. The majority, as you know, Mr. Speaker, aligned themselves with the 10 whose report was inundated with trepidation. Consequently, Mr. Speaker, a journey that should have taken mere days took 40 years, and only 2 from a generation made it to the promised land. Mr. Speaker, I was one of those spies that went into Abaco. I was one of those spies that went into Grand Bahama. And yes, I recognize that there are giants, that there are challenges, but I see promise. I see hope. I see a bigger, better Bahamas. Not Abaco, come go with me. South Abaco, come go with me. Marco City, East Grand Bahama, West Grand Bahama, and yes, Pine Ridge, come go with me. Let us realize that there is a brand new Bahamas that we have to build together. Yes. Let us all go out there and not give in to the giants that we are faced with. But let's, on the same accord, recognize that there is a land full of milk and honey.
That's right, that's right.
A land where we will build a new Bahamas. We will not get the Abaco or the Grand Bahama that we have, but we will have one that is bigger, that is better, and one that we can admire. Stronger. Much stronger. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, and yes, I can say conclusion 5 times because I'm a Baptist, I say conclusion over and over again, I simply ask that we accept the fact that as times change, we must also change. This bill represents a change that now and in the future will allow us to respond and recover in an expeditious manner. For I am convinced that the bill before us today will most certainly fulfill its objective in restoring expeditious normalcy to areas of our nation affected by disaster. And yes, Exuma, yes, Ragged Island, we have not forgotten Ragged Island. Ragged Island will be reevaluated. And as promised, we will ensure that our promises are delivered. In this view, Mr. Speaker, and by virtue of the authority and the authority vested in me as Minister of National Disaster Preparedness, Management and Reconstruction, and as a Member of Parliament for Central Grand Bahama, I therefore stand in full support of this bill and let the record reflect the same. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a second time and committed. A bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a body corporate to be known as the Disaster Reconstruction Authority for the functions and powers relating to that authority, for the designation of disaster zone and a special economic recovery zone, and for connected matters. As many? Chair recognizes the honorable member for the Exumas and Ragged Island.
Thank you. I'll stand alone if necessary. Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the wonderful people of Exuma and the forgotten people of Ragged Island. And I contribute to the Disaster Recovery Authority Bill 2019. As is my tradition, Mr. Speaker, I will say at the outset that we're not going to support this bill. And I will tell you why. In fact, let me go a step further and say that this is one of the worst drafted, poorly thought out pieces of legislation that I've seen. It is actually offensive in many regards. You see, Mr. Speaker, people are hurting on the ground. They're not seeing relief and restoration fast enough. Commerce has not been restored. And there's a looming level of uncertainty as it relates to the future of even their most basic supplies and their most basic needs, like food, water, and shelter, and jobs. Yet we find time to create nonsense legislation. If NEMA isn't working, why don't we fix it? If NEMA needs to be enhanced, why don't we tweak it? Why don't we enhance it rather than creating another bureaucracy? There's no time for big announcements. There's no time for publicity stunts. It's no time for faking and half-stepping. It's time for restoration. It's time for doing. That's what the people want. Not only does this create yet another bureaucracy in the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian, but it flies in the face of the Prime Minister's promise to reduce red tape. We see more. We see more bureaucracy. This bill is the definition of creating red tape and bureaucratic mess. It is so poorly constructed that I wonder if it is not a thinly veiled attempt to make busy work and give government positions to political cronies while the public is preoccupied with the enormity of what the hurricane wrought. It leads me to wonder further, Mr. Speaker, who drafted it, who reviewed it, who determined that it made sense. Mr. Speaker, a new nonsense bureaucracy. It will further frustrate residents and business owners. It will lead to more confusion than clarity. Whilst the government should be focused on building lives and rebuilding infrastructure, it appears focused on building bureaucracies and expanding government. The cries throughout the hurricane-ravaged areas of the Bahamas ring out about a government that is confused and unfocused. The people say the government is not responsive to their needs. They say it is reactive in the worst sense of the word. They talk of a government so tone deaf that it left value-added tax in place at ground zero for the storm until the member for Exuma and Ragged Island made the recommendation, and then it was accepted. But still no clarity on when it will be implemented, Mr. Speaker. And you know, I'm not about self-praise and back-patting, Mr. Speaker. When the Bahamian people win, I'm happy. I was delighted to hear the Minister for Tourism talk about the government considering buying the Grand Bahama Freeport Airport. And if I wanted to backpat, I would remind this government that October 17th or thereabouts, the member for Exuma and Ragged Island made that recommendation.
Let's pat him on the back.
No, I'm not about self-praise and backpatting.
No.
But I want to see the Bahamian people win. So it's when there is bipartisan support for ideas proffered by the PLP, the opposition, I simply say it's an opportunity for Bahamians to win. And it's an opportunity for us to help. We're here to help. I consistently say we're here to help. And by the way, Freetown, although I support the idea, I think there has to be a rigorous negotiation. So I support the idea, but I didn't tell you how much to pay. And this government don't have a good track record in negotiating on behalf of the Bahamian people. But I leave that there. I leave that there for now. I wonder, Mr. Speaker, when we will get around to debating the legislation, Mr. Speaker, putting in place those exigency orders to cause these ministers, prime minister spoke about Abaco and Grand Bahama and when these tax exemptions going to happen, when we're going to get around and actually making it happen, also for the island of Ragged Island. Perhaps in all of the visits to the island and the grandstanding and the publicity seeking, this government missed the glaring and exigent need of Bahamians. They want restoration. We're 8-9 weeks in. They want this government to focus on restoration and not bringing more bureaucracy. If there is some illusion that this authority will fix the mess that has ensued, I would like to dissuade the other side of this notion right now. And I'll go through how poorly thought out and how poorly put together this bill is in just a moment, Mr. Speaker. But I must remind the government that any successful endeavor rises and falls on leadership. In the absence of it, there is confusion, much like what we see now. It appears that all these new bills and consultants and committees and appointments and the new ministry this administration has conjured is on a way to get around focused leadership. I say if something's broken, fix it. I say if something needs to be enhanced, enhance it. Don't work around it by creating NEMA 2.0, which this bill is. Mr. Speaker, I get the distinct impression that this is an attempt to work around the existing systems, perhaps even the existing ministers, perhaps even the existing ministries. This legislation purports that the authority is to work with NEMA, is to share funds with NEMA, may assume responsibilities of NEMA if NEMA so deems. The director of NEMA is mandated to be on the board of the authority. Like NEMA, the Prime Minister has ultimate oversight of this authority by virtue of being the only one who can declare a disaster recovery zone. Perhaps someone can explain to me why we are not fixing NEMA and empowering NEMA to expand its functions instead of creating whatever this new creature will be. Mr. Speaker, Kalani pointed out that the former Prime Minister supports the authority. I don't know, Mr. Speaker, whether that support was proffered before or after the new Ministry of Disaster. I don't know whether it came before or after. The true picture of the bureaucracy, Mr. Speaker. But as I contemplated this morning, I thought I'd map out what this new disaster infrastructure looks like. I wish we had one of those big, pretty charts that the member for Jamaica liked to use. I wish I had some of that duty-free construction paper.
You got that opportunity, late as usual. You should have just get one.
But I don't right now, Mr. Speaker.
I'm not prepared.
I will read it so all can hear. I will read it so all can hear. At the tippy top, you have the Prime Minister, the ultimate minister of disaster. You have 5 members of Parliament, including the Deputy Prime Minister in Grand Bahama. You have the Cabinet. You have the Office of the Prime Minister. You have the Minister of State in Grand Bahama. You have a Parliamentary Secretary in Abaco. Then you have the Minister of State for Disaster. Then you have the political consultants, two in Abaco, and the political consultant in Grand Bahama, who happened to be the president of the Senate. And then you have two technical committees. A good professional, John Michael Clark, is one of them.
He wasn't reading the same amendment.
And then you have NEMA. And I don't know which or where NEMA fits into all of this.
That's a new bill you bringing in.
But
That's a new bill.
But let's remember, on these islands, we have family island administrators. Let's not forget them.
What bill that is, man?
And then on these islands, we have local government.
You gotta stop now.
Local government of which there is a council and there is a chief councilor. And now today,
You need to table that.
we have,
Table that, Mr. Speaker.
adding to this disaster,
That's not his handwriting, Mr. Speaker.
we have NEMA 2. We have,
He ain't draw that. He ain't draw that.
we have,
Only thing he did was
we have NEMA 2.0.
He ain't draw them boxes.
And under NEMA 2.0, you have a chairman.
What?
You have a deputy chairman.
All of that?
You got a managing director.
I don't say that.
You got a board. You got a trust. And you got trustees.
When niggas start working?
I'm going to put this on one of those big charts, Mr. Speaker.
We can be finished with this by now.
But I cannot imagine what the government is thinking. Who wrote this? Who approved it? What sense does it all make? We talk about ease of doing business. We talk about cutting red tape, yet we bring a new bureaucracy. Mr. Speaker, we have a paid chairman who thankfully cannot hold political office to oversee the board. We have a paid managing director to run the authority and hire and second pensionable employees from other government agencies. We have up to 7 directors, all paid to sit on the board. Are we seriously not considering this some F&M administration job creation strategy, Mr. Speaker? Let's stop the faking. Let's stop the pontificating. Let's focus on the restoration. Let's focus on economic growth and real job creation. That's what we must do. We need that now more than ever. And there's also a trust fund. I hear you, Central Grand Bahama. But I'm concerned about Central Grand Bahama. I'm concerned about the Minister of State for Disaster and Recovery. You know why? Because we haven't yet have a clearly articulated job description for the new minister, but yet we have a new disaster authority, Sinance.
Yeah, but you want to be the
Right? We have a new disaster bureaucracy, and I'm concerned that let me leave Central Grand Bahama alone.
Let me call.
He's a good professional. He's a good professional. I've known him.
Let me call Cat on.
I've known him for a long time. Let's just say I'm concerned. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's turn our attention to the bill itself. Clause 60 of the bill conflicts directly with the Ministry of Works, as the authority has the weight upon the approval of different departments under the purview of Works. And I'll share this with you, Michael, because I know that you will look at all of these points in great detail. Section 9(1) of the bill conflicts with the Ministry of Finance in that it needs the minister's permission to borrow, not the Minister of Finance. I'll ask for the record, who wrote this? Who approved it?
You're incorrect.
Who thought it would all make sense? Section 16 allows for the appointment of the disaster recovery committees. However, More committees. More committees.
Government 101.
More committees. What sense does it all make? Why enshrine this in law? What is the relevant ministry? Who is the minister? Yes, it is empowered to do what authorities do, Mr. Speaker, but this authority has no discernible revenues, Mr. Speaker, and only discernible costs and bureaucracy on employees, Mr. Speaker. It adds bureaucracy on top of bureaucracy. Section 22 conflicts with the Ministry of Works, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education, DPL, Water and Sewage, other utilities, the Ministry of Housing, the Ministry of Finance. I may have missed a few. Recall that Section 6G makes it clear that the authority has no special powers to override statutory obligations and requirement of the other government entities as provided for under the law. Perhaps someone should speak with the Minister of Grand Bahama, who can tell you how effectively it works when one has to work across several agencies and ministries but have no authority over them. Section 21 of the bill puts the Ministry of Works, the Ministry of Environment, and this authority in direct conflict. The minister responsible for the environment, as opposed to the Chief Building Control Officer, the Minister of Works, determine the construction which will be permitted in a disaster zone. Section 22 seemed not to align with the bill we just passed that gives the Prime Minister the power to declare concessions and exemptions. Now the Minister of Finance has to do that. The legislation also appears to fly in the face of the government's notion of fiscal responsibility. We should call this the Count Salad Bill. It's mixed right up. It mixes up the bureaucracy. The Count Salad Bill presented by a Count Salad government, Mr. Speaker. The authority cannot allocate more than 20% of the budget for salaries, except, of course, if the minister, a politician, says so. So no more than 20% allocated towards costs, except if the minister says so. But the Prime Minister goes to great pains talking about how he's excluding politicians. So now we trust politicians to be the sole arbiter of fiscal responsibility. I know East Grand Bahama don't believe in this one. Interestingly, they trust the politician with overriding fiscal responsibility. We also find it interesting that the minister referred to in Section 9 of the bill can approve borrowing. Should we assume it's the Prime Minister who can now approve borrowing, since he is the ultimate minister of disaster? Or is it the Minister of State? Is it the Minister of State in charge of the authority that Section 7 of this bill gives the Prime Minister power to appoint? So now the Prime Minister or his appointed Minister of State can authorize borrowing, but only by consulting with the Ministry of Finance. Is this bill trying to work around, my friend, the Minister of Finance? Or is it simply just ill-conceived? This bill allows, through Section 16, the appointment of zone reconstruction committees. More committees, just wonderful, just brilliant. Might I suggest, Mr. Speaker, that the local government on these islands be properly engaged, be properly respected, be properly resourced. There currently appears to be no real engagement with all the consultants falling over each other, Mr. Speaker. But who would know better than the locals how they would want their communities to be rebuilt? These people love their communities. So I ask you to respect these volunteers, respect these locally elected officials, give them bigger budgets, give them more autonomy, and give them more respect. I like how you've been listening to me lately, so I'm going to repeat this. I ask you to empower local government, give them bigger budgets, give them more autonomy, and give them more respect. Again, more respect for their expertise, such as where floods occur and how these synergies will work. I ask you not to squander money on more salaries in a useless new authority while local government struggles to pick up the garbage. whilst teachers and nurses and doctors can't be paid. Section 25(4) calls for the acquisition of goods from local retailers as is practical. This is good sense, Dinar. This is good sense. And I hope, though, it's monitored closely. Hopefully it's transparent. Section 26 allows for the Department of Immigration to give humanitarian travel authorization to those coming from abroad to assist the authority. This should also apply to NEMA as well, although I thought it did. Mr. Speaker, I've had a lot of time to reflect, and I can tell several stories of credible institutions coming into the Bahamas and needing approval to enter even before a hurricane struck. NEMA reportedly referred one in particular to Immigration Department. Immigration reportedly never received it. These were credible private sector international agencies with deep pockets, experienced in search and rescue, 30 men and 5 choppers deep. Still no reply, 8 weeks after Dorian. This provision of the bill is a recipe for further conflict. We should be clearer about who is in charge and what the process is. Section 27 of this bill also sets up another clear conflict with NEMA. I say again, who's in charge? Is it NEMA? Is it this authority? As I say in business, if everyone is in charge, no one's in charge. Section 27(3) is redundant in my view. Anybody can ask anyone to do anything. Also redundant, Section 23 and 24. Do we really need to spell it in law that the Prime Minister can engage international help if there's a disaster? Really? We need to detail that non-governmental agency can contribute to the recovery process? Seriously? Really? I honestly don't even fathom what could be meant in Section 28 with regard to the relationship with NEMA. How you think this cooperation may just happen depending on who wake up on what side of the bed? Mr. Speaker, this is troubling. It's really unthinkable. There should be regulations in place. Where's the enabling structure? How is this all going to work? Who wrote this bill? Who approved it? And who thought it would make good sense? Those are my questions. Then we have clause 29. I was waiting for it. It says, the minister may give directions. Kilani goes to great lengths to talk about how he's excluding politicians from this process, and then it says the minister may give directions in clause 29. There is it right there, Mr. Speaker. As the other side screams, there's no time for politics. As Kalani screams, there's no place for politicians in this authority, we see the politics rears its red head. We see there's some time to inject politics into this bill. Of course, we still aren't clear which minister, Mr. Speaker. We're still unclear. Is this the Prime Minister who gives direction? Is this the Minister of State for Disaster? Is it the member for Central Grand Bahama, the recently appointed Minister of State in the Ministry of Disaster, Preparedness, Recovery, and Reconstruction? Is this the different Minister of State the Prime Minister can appoint through Section 7 that we're talking about? Which politician will be giving direction to this authority? And what does the minister actually do, Mr. Speaker? What is the minister responsibility for disaster preparedness, recovery, and reconstruction going to be doing, Mr. Speaker? The authority has a budget, but the new ministry does not as yet, as far as this parliament is concerned. As I noted earlier, this legislation allows the authority to establish the Bahamas National Reconstruction and Recovery Trust Fund. Not necessarily a bad idea, but if we stack this board of trustees with political cronies, as been the track record of this government, then, Mr. Speaker, it defeats the purpose, Mr. Speaker. I listen, Mr. Speaker, and I hear. But nobody listens to you anymore. Nobody trusts what you say anymore, Mr. Speaker. As vague as this language is, as vague as this language is, I can already tell you this bill won't help this government raise money from the private sector. You got a credibility problem, you see. You got a credibility problem. Because no one seeks to see any urgent need met with monies donated to NEMA. The people of Ragged Island still await an accounting of the funds donated to NEMA. You got a credibility problem. And they're not going to give money to this authority either, because there's no real accountability. There's no real transparency, and the process is inefficient. Yeah, you have a credibility problem. Too much of donated funds are going to be spent on costs, on salaries, on rents, on overhead, on red tape. If you got a problem with NEMA, fix it. Yeah. If you think NEMA needs to be enhanced, enhance it. Don't create NEMA 2.0. Mr. Speaker, it's been 2 weeks since I asked for a report of the funds donated to NEMA for Ragged Island in the past 2 years, and still no response. I will say that one more time before I leave today. People are still asking, where the hurricane money gone? Where is the accountability? Where is the transparency? You have a credibility problem. So even though you said it was all accounted for, even though you appointed a firm on one of these no-bid contracts who you say would track it all, there's still no transparency, still no accountability, and you still have a credibility problem. I see you talk about making regulations in this bill, yet there are none. There sounds like someplace you want to just put people and make sure their pensions are secured. This entire thing is all mixed up. I ask you, who wrote this? Who approved it? And who thought it made good sense? Who you expect to buy into this? There's no time for publicity stunts and grandstanding and pontificating and back-patting. The people want restoration. Creating more bureaucracy is unhelpful. Creating more bureaucracy is unhelpful. Passing a bill that's all over the place is unhelpful. And I'll be right here waiting when you come back to amend it. I'll be right here. And I won't tell you I told you so. I won't tell you I told you so. I'll simply say, if you want to improve it and the Bahamian people win, then I'm all right with that. The opposition does not support this legislation. No right-thinking person should, Mr. Speaker. No right-thinking person should. We're making it less easy to do business, more bureaucratic, adding red tape, adding inefficiencies, a lot more talk, not enough restoration, not enough action. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the people of Exum, on behalf of the forgotten people of Ragged Island, Mr. Speaker, I thank you. I thank you for your minute of being. I rest on behalf of the people, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Golden Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the good and wonderful people of the Golden Gates constituency and I thank each of them for the confidence they repose in me to represent their best interests, and I thank Almighty God. Mr. Speaker, before I go on, let me say, this is a good bill. Mr. Speaker, this is a good bill. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamian people ought to know that this is a good bill. But Mr. Speaker, I will return to that and many of the comments of my good friend from Exuma and Ragged Island. I take this opportunity to publicly offer heartfelt condolences to Sister Karina Simonet's family and the residents of Bamboo Street, Golden Gates 1. She was one of our more experienced persons, Minister, in the constituency at the age of 89. May her soul and the souls of the faithful departed rest eternal, and may perpetual light shine upon her. Mr. Speaker, if I may, sir, before discussing the Disaster Reconstruction Authority Bill 2019, I would be grateful with your leave to express my concern for the hundreds of families whose loved ones and friends are still unaccounted for. More than 8 weeks later, we can only imagine the anxiety, anguish, and distress they are experiencing. As well, sir, we continue to pray for the families and friends of the 67 lost souls in Hurricane Dorian. May God bless, keep, and strengthen all of them. Mr. Speaker, as I did 2 weeks ago, I wish again to thank our many social services professionals who are led by the Honorable Minister for Social Services and Urban Development, the Honorable Member for Southern Shores, as they continue to do great work, especially in the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian in Grand Bahama, Abaco, the Keys, and right here in New Providence. Some might not be aware, but the Department of Social Services to this day, Mr. Speaker, still operates our Emergency Operational Center, the EOC, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. Mr. Speaker, the hard-working staff still today operate the 2 remaining shelters 24 hours a day. Mr. Speaker, perhaps I get some assistance.
We got you.
Perhaps.
We got you.
At the height, we operated and fully staffed 9 shelters in New Providence. Currently, there are about 760 residents in total in both of the shelters, from a height of about 2,200.
Honorable members, the honorable member for Golden Gates, his voice isn't as strong as some of your voices. So I would request that you pay attention and remain as quiet as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am ever so grateful. Mr. Speaker, there have been 6 sustained shelters in New Providence over many weeks since the 1st of September this year. It is only fitting that while we are unable to recognize everyone individually, both social services and urban renewal staff, they have all, emphasis on that, Mr. Speaker, all done a Herculean job being on the front line. We want to specifically recognize the various shelter managers, because they, more than anyone else, are on the front line every day. And as we said, still today, we have 2 shelters that are still operating. At the Kendall Isaacs Gymnasium, where from the onset, hundreds of evacuees were and still are residing, that person in that shelter, that manages Ms. Andrea Newbold. She's done an exemplary job. Thank you. At the Seventh-day Adventist Church Bahamas Academy Gymnasium, where evacuees are still residing there, that's the second one. That shelter manager is Monique McKenzie, and she's done a great job. Mr. Speaker, at the Fox Hill Community Center, and again, we thank the Honorable Member for Fox Hill and the Center's Board of Directors. That person operating that shelter was Ms. Michelle Colley, who was most competently assisted by one of the retired persons from Social Services, Ms. Olive Mackey, and we thank them for a great job. Mr. Speaker, at Pilgrim Baptist Church, we thank Pastor Leroy Major and his staff, who were most helpful and and accommodating. Minister Sandra Fox and Ms. Justina Virgil, persons who work with him and his team. And that person in that shelter was Ms. Betty Ann Brooks. Great job, Ms. Brooks. All Saints Anglican Church. Mr. Speaker, we thank Reverend Father Stephen Davies and his staff, who too were most helpful and accommodating. That person who was the shelter manager there was Miss Janice Evans. Again, a great job. At Calvary Baptist Haitian Church, we thank Pastor Henry Sharima and his staff, who were most helpful and also accommodating. And that person and that shelter was Ms. Marion Astwood. Great job. Mr. Speaker, more than 8 weeks later, we still have social services staff whose ordinary job is to be doing something else. But still, we are staffing the 2 remaining shelters at the Kendall G.L. Isaacs Gymnasium and the Bahamas Academy. Again, we express our heartfelt thanks to the Seventh-day Adventist Church for their kind accommodation and assistance, as we still to this day are using their gym. Again, too, we thank the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture for the continued use of the gymnasium and their staff, especially Arthur Thompson Jr., who's been a great help to us since day one. We still have employees from Grand Bahama, Abaco, and the Keys, who, like many others, lost everything while themselves trying to cope with their new reality. I can tell you, having spoken to many of them, to say it is not easy is an understatement, Mr. Speaker, of the first order. Yet they are working diligently in a caring, concerned, compassionate way every day to help others as best they can. Mr. Speaker, given the enormity and the devastation, the magnitude, the breadth, and the sheer catastrophe of the areas impacted by Hurricane Dorian, including all of Grand Bahama, especially East Grand Bahama, Abaco, especially Marsh Harbor and Treasure Key, and the Keys, to effectively, efficiently, productively, and compassionately maximize all recovery and restoration efforts in a coordinated and comprehensive way for the direct benefit of our residents in those areas. It makes tremendous sense, sir, to create the governmental and organizational structure and systems envisaged by this Disaster Reconstruction Authority Bill 2019. The bill is designed, Mr. Speaker, to enable just that, the effective, efficient, productive, and compassionate maximization of all the reconstruction and restoration efforts in a coordinated way and comprehensive way for the direct benefit of our residents affected by Hurricane Dorian. As to the specifics of the bill, Mr. Speaker, it states in Section 3, subsection 2, that the authority will be responsible for the management of reconstruction and restoration in an area designated as a disaster zone. Mr. Speaker, it's very clear. Yep. It is very clear. The purpose of this bill and what is designed by this bill is very clear. It's very clear, contrary to what others might say. Mr. Speaker, we often hear the view that government is not efficient and it takes a while to get things done. We all hear that. We've heard it from time immemorial. Well, sir, given the enormity of the task at hand, we said earlier, it is progressive of this government to create this authority, or what might commonly be referred to as a board or government corporation. Mr. Speaker, while the side opposite has criticized, we heard just now, a moment ago, and not all of the criticism was well-founded or well-based, and we'll come to that in a moment. The creation of this Reconstruction and Restoration Authority as being unnecessary and creating another level of bureaucracy, it is what they say, Mr. Speaker. Its creation demonstrates the vision and forward thinking of this F&M government. Mr. Speaker, its creation demonstrates the vision and forward thinking of this F&M government led by Prime Minister Minnis. The one thing we and the opposition agree on, Mr. Speaker, And I feel sure that they are with me on this. There's no doubt about it. We all of us in here want to see the reconstruction and restoration of Grand Bahama, Abaco, and the Keys as soon as is humanly possible, having regard to what is available to us, the structure, the systems, and people we put in place to directly respond to this worst ever catastrophe. Cataclysmic and even described as apocalyptic devastation visited on our people by natural causes and no one to blame. Mr. Speaker, the point is that we need to do all we can to expedite the restoration and reconstruction for our people as soon as we can with the most responsive structure, systems, and people. We believe that the authority contemplated by this bill is best to achieve that. Let's be real, Mr. Speaker. People say every day, presumably due to their experience, for one reason or another, that it takes at least 6 weeks to get anything approved through government, and even longer to actually get it done. And in fact, the honorable member right next to me, the member for Central, Grand Bahama, just made the same point. Clearly, that is an issue that needs continuing attention and improvement in our country. This authority would cut through all of that red tape, real or perceived, like a hot knife through butter. Mr. Speaker, let me say, so that the authority envisaged by this bill is well structured from a good governance, accountability, and transparency perspective. And our people, especially those in Grand Bahama, Abaco, and the Keys, will be better served by it. I say that, sir, because when we review and examine Section 6, the powers of the authority, they are all spelled out, specifically and detailed. Specific and detailed, there's no confusion, absolutely none. I should add that so are the functions of the authority in Section 5. Bear with me, sir, as I go through the powers of the authority, because it is important for the Bahamian people to appreciate just how serious this F&M government is about blowing through the red tape and in the most expedient and quickest way, restructuring and restoring Grand Bahama, Abaco, and the Keys. This F&M government is serious and is demonstrated by this very bill. Mr. Speaker, the authority under this bill unquestionably, definitively, and affirmatively has the power. The powers has the power. And the powers are, again, and bear with me, but the people really need to know, and so I'm going to go through some of the powers. The Prime Minister spoke to some of them earlier, and so I will not repeat those. But one of the powers is in subsection C, to invest any funds representing such legacy, endowment, bequest, or gift if not immediately required. And that's very clear. Money's coming to the authority. If it's not put to use right away, the authority has the ability to invest those money until it puts it to use. To appoint such employees as it considers necessary on such terms and conditions, including salaries, allowances, other remuneration, and disciplinary control, as the authority may determine. Clearly, this authority, its board, will have the ability to do all of these things. It is very clear. Now, the opposition might not agree, but it's very clear. There's no confusion here. There's absolutely no confusion. To second individuals from various ministries necessary to conduct the work of the authority. The F&M is taking this authority seriously. The authority will be able to assist their efforts by seconding individuals. And seconding means that have them perhaps come from another ministry or department or a similar type agency to take necessary legal action to implement reconstruction operations as it deems appropriate in any area demarcated as a disaster zone. Mr. Speaker, this authority can take the legal action the authority determines necessary. There's no confusion here, Mr. Speaker. There's none. It's all laid out. It's all laid out. Without limiting or derogating from the operation, but subject to the regulations and in consultation with the relevant ministry, agency, and affected person, to do or cause to be done all of the following things. So it says this authority will have the ability to do all of these things. I, small I, remove or destroy or order the removal of destruction of any building, structure, vehicle, vegetation, animal, or other property. This is real power and real authority we're given to this government corporation. And it's clear what they will be able to do. It's spelled out here. It's here in the act. There's no confusion. There's none. It's smoke and mirrors to talk about confusion. 2, to carry out or cause to be carried out excavation, or other earthwork. 3, to construct or cause to be constructed barriers, buildings, roadways, or other structures. It's all here. The government is serious about the power and authority it's given this corporation, and it's spelling all out. We're going to be able to look to them. Subject to a place or thing to a contamination, direct any person who is in a position to do the following. 1, says double A, to stop any work or operation, to close any premises or places, connect, disconnect, reconnect, shut off, cut off the supply of water, drainage facilities, electrical supplies, or make use of gratuitous services of any person. It's very clear what this government is doing in creating this new corporation, and it is giving the corporation the power to do what it thinks it ought to be able to do pursuant to this act. It's giving them the power. There's no confusion. H, to establish, as has been mentioned several times this morning by the Prime Minister firstly, to establish the Bahamas National Recovery and Reconstruction Trust Fund and provide the appointment of trustees thereof. Now I truly hope that my good friend and honorable member for the Exumas and Ragged Island will find it within his heart to give something to the fund. I'm sure you will. Mr. Speaker, this F&M government again is demonstrably serious about equipping this authority. Most importantly, with the power to carry out its functions and deliver relief to Grand Bahama, Abaco, and the Keys. Mr. Speaker, one might be wondering, where does the Minister of State for Disaster Preparedness, Management, and Reconstruction, or the Honorable I.M. Lewis, my good friend here, fit in this statutory regime? But the next section speaks to just that. It does indeed. You know, my good friend from Exuma mentioned that, but I'll help him. I'll give him some help. Section 7 of the bill, it speaks to that. It speaks to the oversight of the authority. It goes on to state that the Prime Minister may appoint a Minister of State, and we know that's been done, who shall be responsible for the oversight of the authority and any disaster zone reconstruction committee appointed by the authority. Mr. Speaker, the other side has already made a lot of hay about creating this authority when NEMA already exists. We've heard it all. We knew this was coming. But first of all, when the Most Honorable Prime Minister and member for Kalani announced the appointment of the Honorable I.M. Lewis as the Minister of State for the Ministry of Disaster and Preparedness, Management and Reconstruction at the press conference, Mr. Speaker, well over a month ago, on that Sunday afternoon, at the office of the Prime Minister, he indicated that NEMA will be restructured. He said so. I note that the Honorable Member for the Exumas and Ragged Island is in full agreement with the PM, as he too, just 2 weeks ago, said that NEMA ought to be restructured. And I didn't say how, but he acknowledged it needed to be restructured. And so, you know, we all agree. Mr. Speaker, Section 20 of this bill addresses that issue to some extent. It states relationship of the authority with the National Emergency Management Agency. The bill speaks to that. The bill speaks to that, Mr. Speaker. And you know, the honorable member from Exuma seemed to suggest that the bill doesn't speak to that. That's really incredible. That's incredible. The bill goes on to say in subsection 1 that the authority shall collaborate with NEMA in carrying out its function under this act. It shall. Not that it may. It shall. It must collaborate. It says that. So they will work together. That's what it says. They'll collaborate. Where, and it speaks to money that may come in as a donation. And it says where a donation is given for relief, it will go to NEMA if it says for NEMA. For relief, it'll go to NEMA, pardon me. And if it's for reconstruction, it goes to the authority, where no direction as to the proportion, it shall be divided equally. And so what we see here too in this section, which is evident, is that there is a thinking that NEMA will continue to be responsible for the preparedness and the relief immediately after the aftermath. And so any monies that come in regarding those issues, those monies would go to NEMA. If monies came in for restoration, reconstruction, which is following preparedness and relief, those will go to the authority. It's very clear. There's no confusion. Now, some may like to confuse it, but there's no confusion, Mr. Speaker. None. It is noted too that under section, under the schedule, section 1, subsection 3C of the bill, regarding composition and tenure of the board, that the director of NEMA, Mr. Speaker, the director, the top person in NEMA, or a representative, shall be a member of the authority's board. Again, we see the interrelation between NEMA and the authority. So everybody know what everybody's doing. There's no confusion. There's no confusion. Mr. Speaker, I would like to return for a moment to the powers of the authority, section 29 of the bill. It states that the minister, and you know, it's interesting because my good friend from Exuma and Ragged Islands just talked about this. Section 29 of the bill states that the minister may give directions. In subsection 1, it states that the minister may give directions to the authority of a general nature as to the policy. General nature as to the policy, Mr. Speaker. You see, we could talk confusion, smoke and mirrors. Let's talk about what the act says. And let's listen to that again, Mr. Speaker. It's important. The minister may give directions to the authority of a general nature, not a specific nature. It says a general nature. And it says, it limits it to, as to the policy to be followed. That's what it says. It's clear. That's what it says, sir. By the authority in carrying out or in pursuit of its objective. Those are the words. Mr. Speaker, if that was not clear enough, though, it will address the contents of section 2. I will address the contents of section 2. And it states, notwithstanding subsection 1, the minister shall not give directions. The minister shall not, my good friend, Exuma and Ragged Islands, the minister shall not give directions relating to the appointment, termination of appointment, promotion, or disciplining of any employee of the authority. Nor shall the minister give directions in the awarding of contracts. Mr. Speaker, it says the minister shall not do that. It's clear. The authority, the power, this act is giving this authority. This FNM government is taking this authority, this new corporation seriously. It's giving them serious power and serious authority. It says, the minister shall not give directions relating to the appointment, the termination of employment, the promotion or disciplining of any employee of the authority, any. Nor shall the minister give directions in the awarding of contracts. That's any and all contracts. As I mentioned earlier, this FNM government takes good governance, accountability, and transparency seriously. And it takes this authority seriously, hence, giving it the indicated powers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, the seriousness of this bill is demonstrated in the bill under composition and tenure of the board. Subsection 3A states that the chairman and the deputy chairman are appointed by the minister on the advice of the prime minister. And now, you know, the good member from Exuma and Ragged Island made some hay about this, right? But first, it does not just say the minister. It says also on the advice of the prime minister. And I think most of us appreciate that on the advice of the prime minister, by extension, means by advice of the cabinet. And so, no, this is the structure. This is the structure. Prime Minister, subsection 4, Mr. Speaker, states that the chairman shall not hold any political office. So it sets up this entire regime. And then it says also that the chairman shall not have a political office. This is groundbreaking, Mr. Speaker. This is groundbreaking legislation. And the nerve to talk about confusion. There's no confusion here, Mr. Speaker. This is so devoid of confusion, it's incredible. In fact, it's unthinkable. Excellent, exactly. So not only will the chairman not hold any political office, and shall have the appropriate skill set and time to fulfill the functions. Mr. Speaker, the seriousness of this authority is further demonstrated again under removal. Subsection 4, the minister may by order and publish in the Gazette revoke the appointment of any appointed member of the board if he is satisfied that the appointed members, and it goes on to state a number of items.
Honorable member.
Yes.
How much longer are you likely to go? Yes, you have 4 minutes. Would you need any extra time? Would that 4 minutes suffice?
I may need just two minutes beyond that, if I'm permitted, sir. What you want to do?
Consisting as the rules of the House speaks, if we're going to go beyond if we're going to go beyond 1 p.m., we're supposed to move a resolution that the business of the House continues beyond 1. So I do move that resolution that the business of this House do continue beyond 1 p.m. so that we could give the honorable member, the right to be on record and on the Hansard. So I do so move, Mr. Speaker.
Second. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do extend beyond the 1 p.m. hour. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House will extend beyond the 1 p.m. hour. Chair recognizes the honorable member for Golden Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the seriousness of the authority is further demonstrated in subsection 4 under removal. As we were saying a moment ago, Mr. Speaker, the minister may by order and this is important, Mr. Speaker, and the people need to appreciate this. The minister may by order and published in the Gazette, Mr. Speaker. This is rare. This is rarely seen in any act for any corporation. And published in the Gazette. That means make it public. So the public will know. The revoking of an appointment of any appointed member of the board. That has to be gazetted under this act. If the minister is satisfied that the appointed member does the following thing: has been absent for more than 3 consecutive months without permission of the board, has become a bankrupt, is incapacitated due to physical or mental illness, or is otherwise unable or unfit to discharge his functions. Mr. Speaker, this is groundbreaking. This section alone is groundbreaking. That for a minister who has oversight of a government corporation to make any decision to remove a board member, has to gazette that reason and have it made known to the public. This is groundbreaking, Mr. Speaker. There's no confusion here. And this is serious accountability. We've never seen this. I don't ever recall reading this anywhere in any corporation act. None. Mr. Speaker, no one ought to make a mistake. This authority's board of directors is to be taken very seriously. Let's look at subsection 10 of the same composition and tenure of the board. That subsection speaks to appointment of officers and servants. It states, sir, save for the appointment of the managing director, the board shall appoint and employ at such remuneration and on such terms and conditions as it thinks fit a secretary and any such other officers, servants, and agents as it thinks necessary for the proper discharge of his functions. The board, the only person, servant, employee, agent that will work for this authority who will not be employed by the board of this authority will be the managing director. Save for the managing director. Everybody else will be employed by the board. That's accountability. That's not confusion. Mr. Speaker, that says that the board shall be responsible for the hiring of all employees of the authority except the managing director, and to set or agree the terms of such employment, including salaries. This government is taking the creation of this authority and its work on behalf of the people of Grand Bahama, Abago, and the Keys very, very seriously. This is a monumental piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker. This authority, if it was not clear, does not exist merely for reconstruction and restoration following Hurricane Dorian. Remember what the bill stated in the beginning. this authority shall be responsible for the management of reconstruction and restoration, any, and by extension, all areas going forward that are designated as a disaster zone. That is the trigger, that it is an area is designated as a disaster zone. This is indeed groundbreaking legislation for a time such as this, and the experiences that we are likely to encounter for many years to come. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member for Exuma mentioned that there was no basis in the legislation for funding, or something to that effect. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, the act is very clear. The act is very clear. The act is very clear. The Speaker had agreed to give additional time. I asked on the amendment. Okay, I'd asked. No, Mr. Speaker, it is important because the member said there was no provision for funding for no discernible revenues was the exact phrase. No discernible revenues. Mr. Speaker, that is just not so. That's not so, Mr. Speaker. And to put that to the public when it's not so is a serious matter. Subsection 8, funds of the authority, 1, says that the funds and the resources of the authority shall consist of such sums as may be allocated by Parliament for the purposes of the authority. It's in the bill. There's no confusion. There are revenues. There are funds. It's funds. Funds. You see, Mr. Speaker, some people are cute with the words that they're used, right? So revenues, it depends on what the people in the public understand revenues to mean. But let's be clear. The funds, the money that's available for the authority, that's what we're talking about. However they came, however they come about, that's what we're talking about. And this act is very clear. It says money's allocated from Parliament. Secondly, it says sums arising from grants, covenants, donations, and other receipts from persons including national and international bodies. It's right here in the Act, Mr. Speaker. It's here. Sums borrowed by the authority in accordance with Section 9. And it's here, Mr. Speaker. It's here. It's all accounted for. There's no confusion. And you know, Mr. Speaker, a lot was made about funds being borrowed. You have to go to the Minister of Finance. But, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if the member's aware, but I suspect that he is. That is very common. And that is very common in most corporations, Mr. Speaker, because I'm sure the good member knows the government corporation debt is carried by the national government as a contingent liability. It's a contingent liability. So quite naturally, you have to involve the national government if a corporation want to borrow money, Mr. Speaker. Quite naturally. Mr. Speaker, if I may, as you might recall early last month, the Minister of Social Services...
Honorable member, if you can wrap up now.
Yes, I'm getting to that right now, Mr. Speaker. I really appreciate your indulgence. If I may, you might recall early last month, the Minister of Social Services, Mr. Speaker, the good member from Angliston, I think may want to hear this part. I think so. I think she may want to hear this. She may want, yes it is. I think you want to hear this. I think Angliston want to hear this, Mr. If I may, as you might recall early last month, the Minister of Social Services and Urban Renewal, the Honorable Member of Southern Shores, in a presentation in this chamber spoke to the fact that last month was Older Persons Month. He now calls it, as suggested by His Excellency, the Most Honorable Cornelius Smith, Governor General, more experienced person. About 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to represent him, the Honorable Minister, at a more experienced person's luncheon at New Pike, Cat Island. The Honorable Member for Angliston represented the leader of the official opposition, and the Honorable Member for Cat Island, Rumpkins and Salvador. Mr. Speaker, it was a wonderful event, Mr. Speaker. It really was. And I suspect that the Honorable Member for Angliston would agree with me. She would agree. It was a wonderful event. The Island Administrator, Mr. Neil Campbell, and his staff did a great job. So did the Chief Counselor, Mr. Omar Stubbs, and members of the Council. Likewise, Royal Bahamas Defense Force Superintendent Monroe, and the many reverends who attended the event. It was a wonderful event. And I think we were both pleased to be there. The more experienced persons had a great time. They really enjoyed the event held in their honor. when the luncheon was finished, Mr. Speaker, when the luncheon was finished, Administrator Campbell asked both Angliston and I if we were prepared to go with him to visit people at their homes, Mr. Speaker. Okay?
Honorable member. Honorable member.
Angliston, I thought you'd like this, Angliston. Angliston, I thought you'd like this. But I thought you'd like this. Okay.
Honorable member, can you wrap up now?
Yes, yeah. Right. Mr. Speaker, just one. Mr. Speaker, Golden Gates wholeheartedly supports this monumental and groundbreaking Disaster Reconstruction Authority Bill 2019 and looks forward to our getting it done for the people of Grand Bahama, Abaco, and the Keys. Groundbreaking. God bless, keep and strengthen the residents of Grand Bahama, the Abacos, the Abaco Keys, Golden Gates, and the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you.
As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Pine Ridge. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I do now move that the House suspends for its lunching break until 3 p.m. Wednesday, the 6th of November.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.